It's wonderful to be back to Tucson. I was mentioning to Claire a few minutes ago, I am originally from New York, not the city. I guess I'm proud to say that. I'm from upstate near Albany, Saratoga, and I decided to come to the U because it was about the most radical change in landscape I could find in the continental US. To be fairly honest, from being from upstate New York, there was a lot of snow, a lot of cold weather, and no desert, so coming here, it was eye-opening. And looking back on my career here, it radically transformed the way I see the built landscape, the built environment, and it really has inspired me through the years to do what I do today. Going from that radical change of kind of the northeastern landscape where you're surrounded by trees and kind of a different form of urbanity to the kind of subtlety and the uniqueness of the desert Southwest, it really brought a kind of a clear view to me about the role cities play and the role we play in shaping kind of the built environment and landscape. So I thank Mark for encouraging everyone to have me come back down. It's great to be here, so thank you for that. Mainly what I want to talk about tonight is the rapidly changing nature of our cities and the role urban design, and more specifically design, plays in the shaping of our cities. As Mark said, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with a lot of projects up in Denver mostly. I've also done some international work, but through all that, it's kind of reinforced the notion to me that city building going forward is going to be a critical charge for all designers, landscape architects, planners, architects, and everyone else. And all of us working together to solve that problem is going to be critical going forward. Mostly, I've been fortunate in my career to work in center city areas, as I'll call them, not just kind of universal urban design, mostly center city projects. And I believe this is where the future of cities is being studied and has the most potential to influence city design and human settlement patterns. I hope to share stories tonight during our 60 minutes or 45 from, as I call it, the front lines of the profession, and to see if in some small way I can share a glimpse of the positive changes happening in our cities today and the future possibilities that you all, as architects, landscape architects, and planners, have in shaping the built environment in our cities. I believe creating livable cities, I guess it's my term for sustainability, and actually I'm a staunch believer in design as a powerful tool in a way to create a better future. And finally, lastly, I'll talk about Denver, my current hometown. I've been there now for close to 15 years. To talk a little bit about how long city building takes. It takes decades, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes more than one individual. So I'll talk about that for a little bit at the end. First and foremost, what I've learned through the years is cities are for people. I love what I do, and I love cities because I love people. And fundamentally, cities are there for them, and we are there to kind of serve them, make better places for them. They're for the young people, first and foremost. In many ways, these are pictures from Barcelona that actually my wife, who's here, and I took when we were visiting there. They're for old people. And most importantly, they're for families. If you design a city that can succeed in attracting young people, old people, and families, you've created a wonderful situation for the future. Cities are not some abstract, large-scale architectural project. Nor are they a romanticized utopia or single unified vision. They are large, dense, and should be compact places. They are beautifully diverse. They are rightfully contentious and democratic, and they are often congested. And ideally, they are the place of beauty for people. They represent our place within the larger ecosystem of the planet, And this complexity and robust palette is the opportunity we have before us and should be embraced by every good urbanist. Working with this dynamic, it is the best hope we have for a livable and sustainable future. So see, there are vast challenges, but that's where I think, being the optimist in me, I see the wonderful opportunities going forward. Center cities. I believe within cities, most likely the center city is where we see the most dense, compact, diverse form of our built human environment, where the future of our cities will be defined. And similar to how river corridors are the ecological centers of our natural landscape, center cities are the centers of our built human environment. The futures of our city must somehow reconcile this delicate balance between ecology, human settlement, and the built environment. The good news is that there's a vast transformation happening in many things of which you've heard about. First, cities are growing at a drastic rate. They're getting bigger and denser. You can see in this graphic that the growth of major cities is undergoing dramatic changes from 1950 to 2015. You can see how our urban centers are getting larger, our denser areas are getting denser, and population is growing. And this is having a dramatic impact across the globe. Global population is growing exponentially. We're over 7 billion today and growing at a phenomenal rate. What this means is that the urban project, the city building project, is only going to get more challenging. And that's actually, I think, the population today, probably earlier this morning, I would guess, over 7 billion. The other good news is that our culture and choosing how we live is changing. 50 years ago, the world was shaped only by cars, or at least in most North American cities, and autos. Today, as we all know, and as you're seeing here in Tucson with the streetcar and other things, that's changing. The U.S., as with a lot of modernized countries, the expansive growth of the suburbs dominated the landscape. The opportunity of the American dream house in the bucolic setting on a quarter-acre or half-acre lot was irresistible and a core value of the American culture. I could go on and on here about the negative aspects of suburban sprawl and make a broad statement about the end of suburbia, but that's not the purpose of tonight. Because the blunt fact is that Americans still love the suburbs. And a vast majority still prefer to live in the suburban style. But that doesn't negate the need for kind of a more extensive urban design and center city project. We have indicators that this is changing. Since I don't like to spend much time focusing on the negatives, I'll focus on the indicators that our cities, specifically our center cities, as I'll call them, offer the brightest hope for more livable and just future. The reemergence of the bicycle, pedestrian and alternative modes of transportation is a major factor. This is not only a transportation project, it is a question of justice for our cities and our citizens. New public policy in these areas is driving drastic change and having immediate impacts, as seen here in Bogota. Citizens are once again having a choice about what form of transportation they use, and the people are responding positively. Cities are also seeing the economic benefits of moving people instead of cars and are redirecting policies and funding to support bicycles and pedestrians, and I think you're seeing a lot of that here in Tucson, rightfully so, as we are throughout the country. Additionally, as I just mentioned, we can't forget the resurgence of the rail and especially the streetcar. As seen here in Tucson, the reinvestment in our different forms of rail is having a dramatic impact on the land use, the form, private sector investment of our cities. There are two other areas I want to discuss that will have a dramatic impact, I think, on the future of our cities, and focus on a little bit before I talk about my work in Denver. One is infrastructure, and the other one is the rather banal topic of industry, as I'll call it. Both can be considered equally kind of banal and boring topics, but without question they are fundamental to our cities. As seen here, this is just one example. The Los Angeles River is a great example of the way we've handled infrastructure over the past 50 years in many ways. Guided by engineers, and I believe I am in an engineering building, so hopefully I'm not offending anyone. Our engineering solutions do what they are supposed to do. They provide services and protect the safety and well-being of the citizens, and they do a great job at this. As you can see here in this image from the LA River, this will undoubtedly move the water out as quickly and as safely as possible, just as everyone has designed. However, as with everything, nature fights back. And now Los Angeles has been working for over 10 years to recapture its river in the rightful way as an amenity in the center of the city. They are still in the midst of this project, and I believe it'll be decades before it transforms, but the point is that they are in the process of working through this. The unfortunate thing is that engineering challenges like this are nothing new. Over 100 years ago, Frederick Law Olmsted addressed the engineering challenges in Boston by proposing the Emerald Necklace. I think a lot of the landscape students in the crowd have probably heard about this. Most folks have. The Back Bay Fens is not only a fantastic park and public space and open space, it prevents flooding and shaped a larger portion of Boston that is cherished by everyone. So in other words, this was a creative solution to an engineering problem. And infrastructure is not just isolated to water. In Denver in the 1980s, we created the 16th Street Mall thanks to the efforts of a very famous architect, I.M. Pei, and a very famous landscape architect, Laurie Olin, who worked together on that one. The mall is not only the premier public space in the city, it also serves a vital role in the transportation system by providing free rubber tire bus service throughout downtown. And without question, it's hard not to mention the new and innovative forms of infrastructure such as the High Line itself. The adaptive reuse of old infrastructures into new forms of public spaces challenges the classic definition of infrastructure itself, offering exciting possibilities for the future of the contemporary city. Lastly, we should not forget the role of civic architecture. Once again, an area that I think has been consumed by the engineers. Somewhat of a lost art, the role of civic architecture, mostly in the form of bridges, can provide some of the most spectacular additions to cities in our built environment. I want to shift gears now and talk about industry in a similar way. Without going into a long history of industrialization in our cities, it's important to remind ourselves that industry and jobs are a fundamental building block of any city. As we've seen with Detroit, without jobs or industry, cities may not survive. For most designers and urbanists, labor in the industrialized sectors of our cities are an afterthought or a purple land use blob isolated to islands on the outer edge of our cities. They are often forgotten or neglected. They are not sexy or attractive. As a token gesture, new urbanists promoted commercial and mixed uses at the neighborhood and town center levels. However, this was a far cry from addressing the larger industrial question. It was well needed in our cities, but it only addressed part of the question, I guess I should say. Fortunately and painfully, the recession provided a wake-up call. It reminded us that jobs, labor, and industry are the core building blocks of our cities in the urban environment. In places like New York City, the Brooklyn Navy Yards is reinventing itself as a modern industrial cluster for the contemporary city. Rather than turn this area into a new form of housing, which is also needed in the city, they decided to take a different approach. The adaptive reuse of the old is blending with the new to create new forms of mixed uses centered on modern industries, the creative class, and different forms of light industry. In looking at the figure ground here, we see that these are not typical forms of urban space seen in Europe or classic city centers. These are new forms and new spaces. In Denver, we are seeing similar things happen. Thanks to a few pioneering artists and developers, an area north of downtown called River North is transforming from an old industrial corridor to a new innovative area that challenges the conventional ideas of mixed use. As I like to call it, I call it neo-industrial. The area is creating a self-defined aesthetic and use mix. Modern forms are combined with industrial materials and adaptive reuse approaches. New landscapes are generated from recycled materials and becoming active public spaces. You see here some of the modern forms and some of the historical industrial uses or materials being used in these examples. And new eateries and markets as destinations for the neighborhood and city are being created. This is a new form of a market that we have in the River North neighborhood called The Source by one of our pioneering urbanists. That looks at a variety, a kind of new form of a market where they have cheese, a butcher, different restaurants, different beer making places, and actually distilleries there. The beauty of this is that it's not really anything new at all, similar to infrastructure. Jane Jacobs, the famous urbanist and activist, believed that microeconomies and organic local industry is what constitutes a healthy urban district. Her concept of mixed use went well beyond new urbanist thinking and is defined as complex combination of industrial, commercial, residential, and cultural uses. Additionally, she argued for a mixture of buildings, ages, and scale, similar to what you're seeing in the last two examples. Districts like this, she argued, were more valuable to a city's economy than highways themselves. And I think we're seeing the resurgence of that. Now what I'd like to do is talk about Denver and a project that I worked on there specifically for the last 15 years, but it's more about a lens into how cities transform and how long it takes. Denver itself has historically been known as a cow town. We love our cows. There's one of our cow art pieces on the mall. In recent years, we've begun to fight that. We've changed our culture. But the groundwork for this was laid over 2 decades ago. In fact, the gentleman who developed the 2 projects I just showed you in the industrial areas is the same individual who was fighting for downtown 25 years ago. He's now kind of moved up the river, as we call it. And what we're seeing today is kind of an re-emergence of Denver, thanks to all these uses, or all these efforts. Denver began at kind of the nexus of these two waterways you see here. Cherry Creek, Cherry Creek here in the foreground, and then the Platte River here with the Rocky Mountains. This is a western view looking west, and you saw the settlement of the pioneers with the Native Americans here. It's the founding place. Like most cities, Denver had actually a fairly good building stock and gridded system in the early part of last century. Unfortunately, like a lot of cities, then came urban renewal. And you can see up here in this area, all the land that was cleared for parking lot spaces as a part of it. And it really began to destroy the fabric of the city. And you can see it more clearly here, kind of a classic city problem over the last 30 or 40 years. So one time this was all that good sound building block that I just showed, and now it was all surface parking. Additionally, here's downtown Denver Here's Lodo for those of you who've been here, and here's where that river comes through. I actually can't see it here because it's all industrialized. Actually, I see the remnants here of the river. This was all rail yard down in here. We had viaducts going over this area, connecting the downtown areas to the western neighborhoods. So like a lot of cities, we had that industrial crust right adjacent to downtown along the river where the railroad tracks were laid. In about the 70s and early 80s, there were some visions for the area. Here's that river on the upper side of the image here. Sorry. There we go. More office and commercial uses here with a large park, kind of typical of things at the time. A fairly interesting kind of pagoda structure, which we still have yet to figure out what they were intending. And then some loopy ponds and a big kind of civic park here with a mishmash of commercial activity. Fortunately, this vision didn't come to fruition, but it demonstrated that there was a commitment to see this part of the valley transform. It's not unlike, I think, some of the visions that have been created for downtown Tucson. We were, there was an effort about 20 years ago to kind of re-envision the valley in this whole zone down here. So this image represents the area that we were asked to master plan. But if you notice from the previous image, what had already been done down here is that the railroad tracks had already been cleaned up and consolidated. The city and others had gone in and put new infrastructure in here and basically freed up this land for an opportunity for the city. So there was a lot of pre-work that was done by a lot of visionaries just to get it to this phase of the project. We were brought in the mid-90s, the group that I worked for, to actually do the master plan for this chunk of land for it. And at the time, this is what was behind Denver Union Station there. This is that land that I was just showing you, the old industrial land back there. This is Denver Union Station, let's see if I can go back one, which is actually located right here, kind of on the edge of the site. And there were jokes that there was no way you could go and build a new city down here, that it just wasn't possible. There were transients living down here. There was, in fact, there was a newspaper article when we were working on it that someone was decapitated in this area. It was a very, very difficult area. And there were a lot of skeptics wondering what could happen here. The firm I worked for came in and was asked to do the master plan. So here's downtown Denver. Here are those two waterways I mentioned earlier. Here's Cherry Creek. Here's the Platte River. The yellow is the site. This is all downtown. The whole notion was very simple. It was really about reconnecting downtown to the river, creating it along the axis of 16th Street, and providing a new district down there. Very simple kind of urban design scheme, filled in with blocks around it. This was the more detailed illustrative at that time. Here's the waterway, the conceived park, the master plan itself, Denver Union Station, and here are the consolidated rail lines. So this was the vision, pretty simple and straightforward. And I have to say, I mentioned I worked for a firm that did this. There were a number of firms that have worked on this and probably over 50 individuals. So that's the other point I'd like to make, is that projects like this take decades and a lot of resources and individuals. It's not any one person's master vision, and it goes through iterations. This was a model that was created to help visualize that. And you can see here looking back toward downtown itself, the massing, the park, and then the river in the foreground here with the creek. So a very, very, very simple urban diagram. We went through early processes with developers to kind of start to visualize how this could take shape. Everything from the park to the streetscape with a premier bridge in the center of it. Went through detailed design drawings, working on that. This was all back in the late 90s. And it started to happen. This was pre-recession. Fortunately, the park was built. Some of the initial buildings were built here. Here is the connection back to downtown. This was the first wave here of development that came along, most of it residential with some small retail, but really focused on the notion of the public realm, public space, and kind of creating a real livable district. The early use of the park was pretty significant in kind of shaping and changing the attitude, not only of this area, but also the city. Remember I told you a while ago everyone was skeptical? This project has done a phenomenal job building confidence in urban living again. And the combination of the park with the public realm and the residential is what did it. People realized they can now live in the center of the city again. They could actually enjoy public space with others. and they could actually celebrate the reconnection to the river. Here's a view back through the project from the bridge to the park. There are 3 bridges, actually, I'll show you in a little bit, connecting downtown across to this project, across the park to the river, and neighborhoods to the west. So one of the key, actually unfound or unexpected victories of the project was how this whole area not only catalyzed downtown, but it also catalyzed the western neighborhoods. And here you see here some of the civic architecture with the bridge looking back toward downtown. That was kind of the first wave. Then the recession hit, and everything stopped, just like in most cities. But there was still a desire that the long-term vision had to rely on Denver Union Station itself. The plan was set up, but the detailed vision for Union Station hadn't really come to fruition yet. It was always identified as the multimodal center of the region, but that wasn't clear. So there began a master planning process for that portion of the project, and that's what you see here. This was a design, it was a competition that they went through, and the fascinating thing about this, it was actually prepared by the developers, and SOM was involved with this. But the lesson learned here is they took the idea of what would make common sense to anyone about a single point, multimodal kind of central hub like Grand Central Station, and turned it into a district approach, where they actually took Denver Union Station itself, had some of the transportation remain in there. They took another element of transportation, actually moved it up to this portion of the property, and created a large underground bus facility underneath the whole district itself with a direct connection between the two. So they really took the energy and the opportunity of a single transportation project and turned it into a district-wide approach, and then fit it into that previous master plan I was just telling you. The visions, this is back toward Denver Union Station, talked about the upper level retail space here. This is all the below ground bus facilities for regional buses, and then there's this moving walkway that connects light rail to commuter rail. So a very ingenious solution to the project. And here you see that master plan area set within the larger master plan now. So now we've had kind of 2 master plan areas within this large area that's helped now transform this part of the city. It was, here's the kind of framework idea where it was based on the idea of pedestrian connectivity and a pedestrian, where you have a variety of different experience. You have cultural plazas in front of the station. You have the train hall itself, which celebrates a form of civic architecture in the way you arrive on the trains. Had regional shopping and some linear gardens in through here. Had a transit park at this end. This is actually the 16th Street Mall continuation, so that's a phenomenal public space with that bridge I was just showing you. And then there will be local stuff on this side. So a very robust series of public spaces. And here you see kind of the massing, the crude massing that was studied as a part of that, where you get this density and intensity of mixture of uses around it: commercial, retail, hotel, and residential. Once again, showing the features of it. And this is at a point in the process when they were really focusing on the public realm and the civic architecture. And you can see here the visions for the train canopy as a way to celebrate the arrival into Denver. And I always joke, boy, do we like our white canopies in Denver, for those of you who've been to the airport. And here you see this part of the project coming up today. It's actually much further along. I can't remember if I have new images. But currently the train hall is about 95% complete. The 2 buildings along either side are complete. There's construction for a hotel here, and there's a variety of other projects with cranes over in through here. This is an image actually of the light rail plaza that I mentioned at the end, where it's the smaller kind of connection to the light rail on one end of that kind of dumbbell idea. More images. Okay, so here's a better image. So this one shows a more complete version of the train hall being completed. In the foreground here, you can see, actually this is the canopy as a part of that green promenade that's going to connect to the other part of it. This is actually a large, I think 200 or 250 foot residential tower. There's going to be a hotel here. And you could see the intensity of development surrounding that public investment. And really it's become now, it will become in 2016, once the rail lines are open, the epicenter, rightfully so, of the region. So to step back for a minute, Denver, as of 100 years ago, here were some of the viaducts in that area. And oddly enough, we had streetcar, I think like Tucson did. We had viaducts which weren't so appealing, but we had that. Here were the kind of train yards down below, and here's the river in the foreground. So this was at 100 years ago. And then here you have basically the same view or a similar view today, looking back to downtown, about how it's kind of reinvented itself in a different way. You see here one of the foreground pedestrian bridges that link the western neighborhoods. This is the mast for that large, the bridge I showed you earlier, the emergence of the new district in downtown and the train hall, and then obviously the growth of downtown beyond. And I think what this tells us as urbanists is that you can have these visions and they take a long time. And that a lot of things that we see in cities are about reinventing what we already have in different ways that are more pedestrian friendly and create more livable cities. This was really about redirecting a lot of the ideas and the funding toward pedestrians in ways that would make our city more livable. And we've seen great success as a result of it. Lastly, I just want to comment on something that really resonated with me when I came out of school. For those of you who remember Peter Smith, Smith's one of the famous members of Team 10 and came out of, what's his name, Gropius's group, broke off. He talked about kind of what the role of the architect or the designer was afterward. And what I always appreciate that he says, commencement is not the end of academic studies or when a degree is conferred, but rather the idea that students are commencing a new beginning in their payback to society at large. And I think with the urban project before us, with all of you going out, I think as architects, landscape architects, planners, or urban designers, that's your charge. Most importantly, like I said initially, cities are for people. We're there to serve society and make it a better place. We use design as a creative way to do that. Going forward, I'd say this: work together and integrate, work collaboratively. The days of working in silos and independently is done. You will see a future where integration, collaboration, and synthesis is the way of the future in doing things normally. And in my opinion, that's what we need with the ever-changing and growing urban project. I do believe center cities are kind of the core of what we need to be working on in that realm to kind of help then share those stories with other parts of the world. But I am confident more than ever that the role of the kind of urban designer and design in general in solving those problems, will lead to a better future. That's all. Thank you.